In the world of country music, some voices are born from joy, but others are forged in hell. Imagine a life relentlessly crushed by fate. A woman who endured abject poverty from childhood, grew up through marriages rife with violence and abuse, and then suffered the ultimate pain that no words can describe. Losing 2 sons to the scars of a single war. One, a veteran who took his own life after returning home from Vietnam, and the other, killed in action on its distant battlefields. It was a chain of tragedies sufficient to shatter any soul. Then imagine another tragedy, a quieter but no less haunting one. It is the burden of a genius, a man living in the solitude of the very verses he created. He distilled the pain of others, turning it into immortal ballads, yet carried a quiet sadness and emptiness that fame could never fill. His tragedy was not one of violent external shocks, but of a slow erosion from within. The resilient woman who walked out of the ashes of those unimaginable tragedies was Jan Howard. The quiet man who carried the weight of those verses was Whispering Bill Anderson. The world knew them as one of the most successful and beloved duos of their time, their voices blending in perfect harmony. But behind the stage lights, theirs was an alliance of broken souls. They didn't just find harmony in music, they found a refuge, a lifeline in the storm of their own lives. Her fiery voice brought life to his contemplative verses, and his quiet, steady presence became the anchor that held her when grief threatened to drown her completely. Before we can understand the magic they created together, we must have the courage to walk the 2 long, lonely, and painful roads that led them to each other. And we will begin with the woman whose life was an extraordinary epic of survival. To understand the woman who became Jan Howard, you must first understand the world that forged Lula Grace Johnson. She was born on March 13th, 1929, in the tiny, unincorporated community of West Plains, Missouri. This was not the Texas of oil barons and sprawling ranches. This was the hard-scrabble landscape of Missouri Ozarks, a land of small farms and profound poverty, made even more desperate by the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. She was the 5th of 8 children born to a Baptist family of sharecroppers, a life that was, in essence, a form of economic servitude. The Johnsons worked land they didn't own and lived in a house that could be taken away at any moment, their lives dictated by the whims of the weather and the price of cotton. Imagine a childhood without electricity, without indoor plumbing, a world where the day began before sunrise and ended long after sunset with the ache of physical labor. For young Lula Grace, life was a constant competition for scarce resources, for food on the table, for a moment of her parents' exhausted attention. But amidst the hardship, there were 2 sources of escape, 2 streams of magic that flowed into their simple home. The first was the church. The Baptist faith was the bedrock of their community, and its music was the language of their souls. It was in the pews of their small wooden church that she first learned to sing, her voice joining the chorus of hymns that spoke of suffering, hope, and the promise of redemption. The second escape came through the air itself, crackling to life from the speaker of the family's battery-powered radio. On clear nights, the signal from WSM in Nashville, Tennessee, would travel across the country, bringing the sound of the Grand Ole Opry into their living room. It was a broadcast from another universe, the lonesome yodel of Jimmie Rodgers, the heartfelt ballads of the Carter family, and later the raw honky-tonk sorrow of Hank Williams. This was the soundtrack to her dreams. The music spoke of a world beyond the cotton fields, a world of emotion, drama, and glamour. It planted a seed in the young girl's heart, a quiet, desperate hope that music could be a way out. But for a young woman in rural America in the 1940s, the most common escape route was not a stage but an altar. In a society that offered severely limited educational and professional opportunities for women, early marriage was often seen as the only viable path forward. It was a social expectation, a perceived gateway to stability in adulthood. For Jan, who dropped out of school after the 10th grade, this path seemed preordained. And so, in 1944, at the tender age of just 15, Lula Grace Johnson married a school friend, Matt Johnson, and traded one set of hardships for another. The dream of a better life, she would soon discover, was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. A 15-year-old bride. Today the words themselves are shocking, but in the context of Jan's time and place, it was a tragically common story. The marriage began with the naive hope of teenage sweethearts, but the harsh realities of life quickly set in. They were just children themselves, with no money, no education, and no real prospects. The romance of youth soon soured under the immense pressure of survival. The dream of a happy home devolved into a nightmare of poverty, control, and violence. Jan became a mother almost immediately. Before she was 21, she had given birth to 3 sons, Jimmy, David, and Tony. Her life became a relentless cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and the struggle to care for her growing family on next to nothing. The physical and emotional toll was immense. In her autobiography, she would later reveal the hidden pain of this period, the heartbreak of multiple miscarriages, the constant fear of not having enough food for her children, and the suffocating loneliness of being trapped in an abusive relationship. Her husband's failures and frustrations were taken out on her, both physically and emotionally. She was living the very life of the wronged woman she heard sung about on the radio, a life of silent suffering behind closed doors. For nearly a decade, she endured. Her sons were her entire world, the reason she held on. But by 1953, she had reached a breaking point. The girl who had entered the marriage seeking stability now had to summon a different kind of strength, the courage to leave. It was a monumental decision. In the 1950s, a divorced single mother was a social outcast, often blamed for the failure of her marriage, but the instinct to protect her children was stronger than her fear of the unknown. One day, she packed a few meager belongings, gathered her 3 young boys, and fled. She headed west, towards the distant, glittering promise of California, with no plan, no money, and no one to rely on but herself. The journey was not just a change of location. It was a desperate act of self-liberation, the first defiant note in what would become a lifelong song of survival. Los Angeles in the 1950s was a city of dreams, but for a single mother with 3 young sons and no connections, it was a concrete jungle. Jan Howard's life in California was a world away from the Hollywood glamour depicted in the movies. It was a grueling existence of long hours and low wages. She worked as a waitress, her feet aching at the end of double shifts. She took on secretarial work, her fingers flying across a typewriter in anonymous office buildings. Every cent she earned went towards the rent for their tiny apartment and putting food on the table for her boys. It was a lonely, exhausting, and often thankless life. But through it all, she held on to the one thing that was truly hers, her voice. Music was her solace. She sang to her children at night, and she sang to herself to keep her spirits up. And in a city filled with aspiring artists, her talent did not go unnoticed. She began to pick up work, singing on demo recordings for songwriters. It was unglamorous, often uncredited work, but it was a foot in the door of the music industry. Her job was to take a songwriter's new creation and bring it to life, to imbue it with the emotion and power needed to sell it to a major recording artist. And she was brilliant at it. Her voice, rich with the authentic pain and resilience of her own life, could make any lyric feel real. It was through this work that she met a man who would change her life, for better and for worse. His name was Harlan Howard, and he was a brilliant, prolific, and intensely charismatic songwriter on the verge of becoming a legend. He heard Jan sing on a demo and was captivated, not just by her voice, but by her spirit. They began writing together, their creative chemistry sparking into a passionate romance. For Jan, it felt like a miracle. She had found a partner who not only loved her, but who saw and believed in her talent. They married in 1957, and Harlan became her fiercest advocate, pushing her out of the shadows of the demo studio and into the spotlight. It seemed like the happy ending she had fought so hard for. But Jan's life had taught her that shadows often lurked behind the brightest lights. The marriage to Harlan was creatively fruitful, but personally turbulent. And it would end with a betrayal so shocking and bizarre, it sounds like the plot of a country song. In a secret that was buried for years, Jan discovered that Harlan was a bigamist. The man she had married, the man who was the father figure to her sons, had a wife in another state he had never legally divorced. The foundation of her new life crumbled beneath her. The trust was shattered, the marriage over. She was once again a woman wronged, her heart broken by a man she thought had been her savior. But this final devastating betrayal would inadvertently become the catalyst for her own stardom. Before they split, Jan recorded a demo for one of Harlan's new songs. It was a raw, aching ballad about a heart breaking into pieces. The demo found its way to Nashville and into the hands of the legendary Patsy Cline. The song, of course, was I Fall to Pieces. Patsy Cline's iconic recording would make it one of the most famous songs in country music history. But the first voice to give that song its soul, a voice channeling a very real and recent heartbreak, was Jan's. That powerful demo became her calling card in Music City. It proved she wasn't just a songwriter's wife, she was a world-class vocalist. It landed her a contract with Decca Records. In 1960, she released her first single, The One You Slip Around With. It shot up the country charts. After a lifetime of hardship, after 2 failed marriages, and after years of singing in the shadows, Lula Grace Johnson from Lone Oak, Texas, was finally Jan Howard, a star in her own right. She had survived, and now she was ready to tell her story. Jan's hard-won success was a testament to her sheer force of will, a triumph forged in the fires of personal struggle. But as she was taking her first steps into the Nashville spotlight, another artist was arriving in Music City via a very different road. He was a young man whose journey was not one of desperate escape, but of quiet, methodical ambition. As Jan Howard was fighting her way out of the shadows, forging a new life from the ashes of betrayal and poverty, another story was unfolding on the other side of the South. This journey was not one of desperate escape, but of quiet, methodical ambition. It was the story of a young man who, like Jan, found his first love in the voices crackling from the radio. But his path to Nashville would not be a frantic cross-country flight for survival. It would be a calculated, strategic ascent, built not on instinct and grit, but on intellect, observation, and an almost preternatural gift for turning the human heart into a 3-minute song. This was the world that created Bill Anderson, the man whose gentle whisper would one day provide the perfect counterpoint to Jan Howard's fire. His story is the other half of the equation, a testament to a different kind of resilience, the resilience of the craftsman, the artist who builds his legacy one word, one note at a time. James William Anderson III was born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1937, but his formative years were spent in the bustling, optimistic suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. His was a stable, middle-class upbringing, a world away from the sharecropper shacks of Jan Howard's youth. While his family wasn't wealthy, they were comfortable, and young Bill was afforded the simple security of a childhood free from the constant anxieties of survival. He was a bright, athletic, and deeply observant boy who excelled in school and sports, but his true education came from the same magical source as Jan's, the family radio. He was captivated by the stories and melodies of the Grand Ole Opry. He didn't just listen, he studied. He dissected the lyrics of Hank Williams and the harmonies of the Louvin brothers, absorbing the architecture of a great country song. The songwriting bug bit him early and hard. At just 10 years old, after hearing a song about Texas, he wrote his first composition, a heartfelt tribute titled "Carry Me to My Texas Home." It was a sign of the profound empathy and narrative skill that would define his entire career. While he maintained a private, personal life, it is known that he lost his mother as a young man. This loss is believed by many to have instilled in him the deep well of melancholy and sensitivity that would surface in his most powerful ballads. This private grief, unlike the public battles Jan would face, was channeled inward, becoming a source of creative inspiration rather than a catalyst for escape. As he grew, his ambition began to crystallize. But unlike so many aspiring musicians who saw education as a detour, Bill saw it as a tool. He enrolled at the University of Georgia, but he didn't study music. In a move of incredible foresight, he pursued a degree in journalism. This decision is one of the great secrets to his enduring success. Journalism taught him how to write with clarity, precision, and economy. It taught him how to understand an audience, how to communicate a complex idea in a simple, powerful way, and how to navigate the world of media. While his heart was in songwriting, his head was in strategy. This education provided him not only with a safety net, but with a unique skill set that would allow him to become not just a country star, but a media mogul. It was the first step in a master plan, a quiet, deliberate journey to the heart of Music City. Bill Anderson's conquest of Nashville didn't begin with a guitar case and a dream. It began with a microphone and a stack of records. Before he was a household name, he was a disc jockey at station WJJC in Commerce, Georgia. This wasn't just a job to pay the bills, it was a strategic immersion into the very heart of the music business. From his perch in the DJ booth, he had a front row seat to the ebbs and flows of popular taste. He knew which songs made the phone lines light up and which ones were met with silence. He learned the art of promotion, the subtle power of a good introduction, and the importance of connecting with a local audience. He was, in essence, conducting market research every single day, all while building his own name and reputation in the community. While working at the radio station, he never stopped writing. He poured his observations about life, love, and heartbreak into his songs. In 1958, a moment arrived that would change everything. He wrote a song on a rooftop in Commerce, Georgia, a simple, poignant ballad about loneliness in a bustling city. The song was called City Lights. Through his industry connections, the song found its way to country music royalty, Ray Price. Price recorded it, and it became a massive, career-defining #1 hit that dominated the charts for 13 weeks. Imagine the surreal experience. A young man in his early 20s, still working as a local radio DJ, hearing his own words and melodies broadcast across the nation as the biggest song in the country. The success of City Lights was his golden ticket. He was no longer just a hopeful, he was a proven hitmaker. When he finally made the move to Nashville, he didn't arrive as an unknown artist begging for an audition. He arrived as the celebrated young writer of a Nashville classic, a man whose reputation had preceded him. He was immediately signed to a songwriting deal with the prestigious Tree Publishing and a recording contract with Decca Records, the same label as Jan Howard. As a recording artist, Bill presented Nashville with a puzzle. His songwriting was impeccable, but his vocal style was a radical departure from the norm. In an era dominated by the powerful resonant baritone of men like Eddie Arnold and Ray Price, Bill's delivery was a soft, gentle, almost spoken whisper. It was a style born of intimacy, as if he were sharing a secret directly with the listener. The industry was initially skeptical. Was this quiet, conversational voice strong enough to carry a record? The press and fans, however, were captivated. They gave him the affectionate and enduring nickname Whispering Bill. He silenced any remaining industry doubts in 1963 with Still, a heartbreaking ballad he wrote and performed himself. The song was a monster hit, topping not only the country charts but crossing over to become a top 10 hit on the pop charts as well. It was a stunning validation of his unique artistic vision. The whisper was no longer a novelty. It was a trademark. Whispering Bill Anderson was now a superstar, a respected songwriter for legends like Jim Reeves and Lefty Frizzle, and a beloved recording artist in his own right. He had reached the pinnacle of country music success through a combination of raw talent and calculated precision. His path had been one of steady, deliberate construction, a world away from the chaotic survival that had defined Jan Howard's journey. But in the heart of Music City, their two very different paths were about to converge. As the 1960s dawned, Jan Howard and Bill Anderson were moving on parallel tracks at Decca Records, two stars in the same galaxy, but not yet in the same orbit. After the success of her first hit, Jan found herself on the relentless treadmill of a touring country artist. Life on the road was a grueling cycle of long bus rides, lonely hotel rooms, and performances in smoky honky-tonks and county fairs. She was a woman in a man's world, navigating the often treacherous landscape of the music industry. She carved out a solid solo career, landing a string of hits that showcased her powerful voice and her uncanny ability to convey the stories of strong yet vulnerable women. During this time, she continued her search for the personal stability that had always eluded her, marrying for a third time in 1963. On the surface, she was a success story, a beautiful chart-topping artist with a seemingly stable home life. But beneath it all, the ghosts of her past lingered, the poverty, the abuse, the betrayals. These experiences had instilled in her a deep emotional fragility, a vulnerability that she would pour into her music, but which left her unprepared for the unimaginable tragedies that lay just ahead. Bill Anderson's career, meanwhile, was a picture of prolific, multifaceted success. He was a fixture on the Grand Ole Opry, a constant presence on the charts with his own hits, and one of the most in-demand songwriters in town. His catalog was a goldmine, producing timeless classics for a who's who of country legends. He even began hosting his own syndicated television program, The Bill Anderson Show, another strategic move that beamed his charming, soft-spoken persona into living rooms across America. He was not just an artist, he was an enterprise, a brand built on a foundation of incredible work ethic and an intuitive understanding of his audience. His emotional life remained a private, closely guarded territory, his songwriting the only outlet for the quiet melancholy that lay beneath his cheerful public image. By the mid-1960s, the Nashville sound was at its commercial peak, and the country duet was a popular, if often temporary, feature of the musical landscape. At Decca Records, producers looked at their roster and saw two of their brightest stars. Jan, the fiery songstress with a voice that could shake the rafters, and Bill, the master storyteller with a voice that could break your heart. On paper, they were opposites, She was all power and passion. He was all intimacy and introspection. But a producer with a keen ear heard something in that contrast, a potential for a chemical reaction, a perfect, explosive balance of fire and rain. The stage was set for a partnership that would redefine the country duet and change both of their lives forever. The fateful meeting took place in 1965 within the walls of Decca's recording studio in Nashville. The idea was to have them record a single together, a classic cheating song titled I Know You're Married, But I Love You Still. Imagine the scene. Jan, a woman whose life had been a series of hard-fought battles, stepping up to the microphone, her presence commanding and confident, and beside her, Bill, the thoughtful, meticulous craftsman, a man whose energy was quiet and contained. There was likely a professional respect between them, but they were colleagues, not close friends. Then, the music started. They sang the first lines together, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The alchemy was instant and undeniable. Jan's powerful, soaring vocal full of raw, unvarnished emotion was the perfect vessel for the heartache in Bill's lyrics. And Bill's gentle, whispering harmony was the perfect anchor, a steadying presence that grounded her fire and drew the listener in even closer. It was a sound that was both classic and completely new. It wasn't a battle of the voices, it was a conversation, a perfect fusion of two distinct but complementary emotional worlds. The producers in the control room knew immediately they had stumbled upon something magical. The song was a respectable hit, climbing to number 25 on the charts. But its true success was in proving the concept. The public response was overwhelming. Fans were captivated by the unique chemistry between the two artists. It was clear this was not a one-off pairing. They began touring together, and their live shows became legendary. Their on-stage dynamic was as compelling as their records. Jan's fiery wit playing off of Bill's gentle, self-deprecating humor. The partnership was strictly professional. Both were married to other people, but the emotional intimacy they conveyed in their music felt profoundly real. Then in 1967 came the song that would cement their legacy. Bill wrote a simple, beautiful ballad about the redemptive power of love, a song whose lyrics seemed to speak directly to the public's perception of their partnership. It was called For Loving You. From the opening lines, the song was pure magic. It went straight to number 1, where it stayed for 4 weeks, becoming not just a country hit, but a national sensation. It was the song that transformed them from successful solo artists who occasionally sang together into the definitive country duo of their era. They won the Country Music Association's award for Vocal Group of the Year, a testament to their undisputed reign as the genre's top pairing. They were on top of the world, a perfect picture of musical harmony and success. But as they stood in the spotlight, singing songs of love and devotion, Jan Howard's world was about to be plunged into a darkness so profound that it would test the limits of their friendship and her own will to survive. Their ascent as a duo was meteoric, a perfect alignment of talent and timing. By 1967, Jan Howard and Bill Anderson were not just stars, they were an institution. Their number 1 hit, For Loving You, had transformed them into the undisputed king and queen of the country duet. They were a perfect package of fire and grace, their voices and personalities weaving together to create a captivating story that America fell in love with. Their world became a relentless, exhilarating whirlwind of success. Life on the road was their new reality, a seemingly endless string of more than 200 shows a year. From the grand stages of state fairs to the hallowed halls of Nashville's Ryman Auditorium, their names were on the marquee. This was the golden era of the touring country artist. Their home was a custom tour bus, a rolling bubble of camaraderie and exhaustion that hurtled them from one city to the next. For Jan, a woman who had spent so much of her life fighting for stability, this nomadic existence was both a blessing and a curse. It was a world away from the poverty she had known, a life of applause and admiration. But it was also a life of constant motion, of lonely hotel rooms and fleeting connections, a life lived out of a suitcase. Bill Anderson, meanwhile, was solidifying his empire. He was more than just a singer and songwriter. He was a media personality. His syndicated television program, The Bill Anderson Show, was a massive success, beaming his easygoing charm and musical genius into millions of homes each week. Jan was a frequent and beloved guest, their on-screen chemistry as palpable as it was on stage. This platform amplified their fame exponentially, making them one of the most visible and popular acts in all of American music. They had reached the summit. They were living the dream they had both, in their own separate ways, chased for so long. They were singing songs of timeless love and devotion, completely unaware that they were standing on the precipice of a tragedy so profound it would shatter their perfect world and test the very limits of the human spirit. While Jan Howard was singing to cheering crowds under the bright lights of America, a different, far darker story was unfolding half a world away. The year was 1968. The Vietnam War, a conflict that had been a distant rumble on the evening news, had escalated into a national trauma. The Tet Offensive had shattered any illusion of a swift victory, and the country was being torn apart by protest and division. For millions of American families, the war was an intensely personal reality, a source of constant gnawing anxiety for the sons and brothers and husbands serving overseas. For Jan, this national anxiety was a mother's private terror. Her oldest son, Jimmy, the first baby she had held as a teenage mother, was serving in the Army, stationed in the heart of the conflict. Like any mother, she lived in a state of suspended fear, her days marked by the desperate wait for a letter, her nights filled with prayers for his safety. She was on tour in the midst of her greatest professional triumph when the unimaginable happened. The details of the moment are lost to history, but the scene is one that played out in countless homes across America. A knock on a hotel room door, the sight of two uniformed officers, the carefully chosen, devastating words. Her son Jimmy, a young Army veteran who had served in Vietnam, had taken his own life. He was only 21 years old, a casualty of the war long after he had left the battlefield. In an instant, the applause, the awards, the #1 hits, all of it became meaningless noise. The world tilted on its axis and plunged into a silent, suffocating darkness. The survivor, the woman who had endured so much, was now faced with the one blow she thought she could never withstand: the loss of a child. The grief was a physical force, an all-consuming wave that left her unable to function. How could she possibly step onto a stage and sing about love when her own heart had been ripped from her chest? For a time, she couldn't. She retreated into a shell of sorrow. But Jan Howard was a fighter. It was the only way she knew how to be. And in her darkest hour, she did what she had always done. She turned her pain into a song. She wrote a powerful, heartbreaking ballad titled "My Son." It was not a protest, but something far more profound, a mother's prayer. Written after Jimmy's death, the song was a desperate plea for her surviving son, David, and all the other sons fighting overseas, begging them to stay safe and come home. The song became a poignant and significant hit for military families, an anthem of their shared anxiety and hope. It was an act of immense courage, a way of honoring her son's memory and finding a sliver of purpose in an ocean of senseless loss. She had somehow found a way to stand up again, to keep singing, believing that the worst was now behind her. She was wrong. For the next 3 years, Jan Howard lived a double life. To the public, she was the resilient star, the brave Gold Star mother who had turned her grief into a powerful anthem. She and Bill continued to tour and record, their professional success a welcome distraction from her private sorrow. She poured her energy into her surviving sons, David and Tony, clinging to them with the fierce protective love of a mother who had already known the ultimate loss. David, her second-born, eventually followed his older brother's path and enlisted in the army, a decision that must have filled Jan with a mixture of immense pride and paralyzing fear. By 1971, the war in Vietnam was still raging. Jan had found a fragile new normal, a way to live with the permanent ache in her heart. She was a star, a respected member of the Nashville community, and on the cusp of receiving her industry's highest honor. And then, history repeated itself with an almost biblical cruelty. The knock on the door came again. The uniformed officer stood before her once more. The carefully chosen words delivered a second, unthinkable blow. Her son David had been killed in action in Vietnam. To lose one child in a war is a tragedy. To lose two is a statistical and emotional impossibility, a horror so profound it defies comprehension. This second loss was the one that truly broke her. The strength she had summoned after Jimmy's death evaporated, replaced by a bottomless, hopeless despair. She was convinced she was cursed, that some malevolent force was determined to destroy her. She fell into a deep, debilitating depression, canceling shows and withdrawing completely from the world. The fire in her voice was extinguished, silenced by a grief too heavy to carry. The woman who had survived everything was finally completely undone. It was in this moment, in the absolute abyss of her despair, that the true nature of her partnership with Bill Anderson was revealed. Bill Anderson, the quiet, introspective songwriter, was now faced with a situation that had no easy answers, no simple rhyme or verse. His partner, his friend, was drowning, and he was one of the few people who could reach her. Their relationship, always defined by a warm but professional distance, now had to evolve into something more. Bill became Jan's anchor in the storm, her lifeline back to the world of the living. This period is the great hidden secret of their partnership, a story not of musical collaboration, but of profound selfless friendship. His support was not about grand gestures. It was about quiet, constant presence. He refused to let her disappear. When she was too grief-stricken to perform, he kept her on the tour payroll, insisting that her place on the bus was waiting for her whenever she was ready. He would call her, not to talk about music or business, but just to sit with her in her silence, to let her know she wasn't alone. He listened for hours as she raged and wept, never offering platitudes or easy solutions, but simply bearing witness to her pain. He became, as Jan would later say, the brother she needed. It was Bill who gently pushed her to write again, not for the charts, but for herself. He encouraged her to document her story, to put her experiences on paper, a process that would eventually lead to her powerful autobiography. And it was Bill who stood beside her on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, night after night, as she slowly, painstakingly found her voice again. He would be there in the wings, giving her a nod of encouragement, and he would be there on stage, his calm, steady harmony, a literal support for her trembling voice. In a moment of poignant and perfect timing, in 1971, the very same year she lost her second son, the Grand Ole Opry officially invited Jan Howard to become a member. It was more than just a professional honor. It was an act of embrace. It was the Nashville community with friends like Bill at the forefront, wrapping their arms around her, giving her a permanent musical home, and reminding her that she was not just a grieving mother, but a vital and beloved artist. Her induction was a symbol of her survival, a testament to the community that refused to let her go. The professional duo of Jan Howard and Bill Anderson began to wind down around 1973. It was not a bitter breakup, but a natural evolution. Their lives were moving in different directions. Jan needed time and space to continue her long, slow process of healing, away from the relentless demands of the road. Bill's career was expanding even further into television and other media ventures. They had created a timeless body of work together, and now it was time to walk their separate paths again. But the bond between them, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of unimaginable tragedy, was now unbreakable. Their partnership on the charts was over, but their friendship would endure for the rest of their lives. The crucible of the late 60s and early 70s had cemented their bond, but it also marked the end of an era. When the whirlwind of their shared stardom subsided in the mid-1970s, Jan Howard and Bill Anderson stepped back from the relentless demands of being a duo, but they never stepped away from the music. The years that followed were not a retreat into silence, but a profound third act for both artists. They walked separate paths, each building a unique and lasting legacy that extended far beyond their famous duets. For Jan, this chapter was about transforming her unimaginable pain into a testament of survival, becoming a matriarchal figure of strength and resilience. For Bill, it was about cementing his status as a songwriting titan and a media pioneer, his quiet ambition never ceasing. Their professional partnership may have ended, but their individual stories and the deep, abiding friendship that connected them were far from over. This is the story of their later years, a journey through the long twilight of incredible careers, and a final look at the enduring power of the survivor and the songwriter. For Jan Howard, the end of the duo was the beginning of a long, slow journey toward healing and a new kind of purpose. Her anchor during this time was the Grand Ole Opry. Having become a member in the tragic year of 1971, the Opry was more than just a stage. It was her sanctuary, her family, and her home. For nearly 50 years, she was one of its most cherished and constant presences. The weekly ritual of stepping into that famed circle was a source of stability in a life that had known so much chaos. On that stage, surrounded by friends and fellow artists who knew her story, she wasn't just a singer. She was a living legend, a symbol of the heart and soul of country music. It was during these years, with the quiet encouragement of friends like Bill Anderson, that Jan embarked on her most courageous artistic endeavor, writing her life story. The process of putting her experiences onto paper was an act of profound bravery. For decades, many of the darkest details of her life, the abuse in her first marriage, the shocking bigamy of Harlan Howard, the full crushing weight of losing 2 sons, had been subjects she largely avoided in public. Her 1987 autobiography, aptly titled Sunshine and Shadow, was a landmark moment. It was an unflinchingly honest account of her journey, a book that refused to wallow in self-pity. She laid bare the tragedies, not to garner sympathy, but to tell a story of survival, to show the world that it was possible to walk through hell and emerge on the other side, scarred but not broken. The book was a testament to her spirit, a final reclamation of her own narrative. But life, it seemed, had one more cruel twist in store for her. In 1971, the same year she lost her son David and joined the Opry, her third husband, Maurice Rodin, was shot and killed during a robbery at his workplace. It was a senseless, random act of violence that added another layer of almost unbelievable tragedy to her story. It was a loss that could have been the final breaking blow. Instead, it solidified her legendary status as the ultimate survivor. She absorbed the pain, as she always had, and channeled it into her unwavering commitment to her music and her Opry family. In her later years, she became a mentor to a new generation of female artists like Pam Tillis, offering quiet guidance and the wisdom of a woman who had seen it all. She had earned her place not just as a star, but as a respected elder, a woman whose life was as powerful as any song she ever sang. While Jan was cementing her legacy as the Opry's great survivor, Bill Anderson was busy building an empire. His career in the decades following their duo was a masterclass in adaptation and diversification. He never stopped being a successful recording artist, but his focus increasingly turned to the two pillars of his genius: songwriting and media. As a songwriter, he entered a new golden age, penning hits for artists like Conway Twitty and George Strait, and even crossing genres to co-write with pop and soul artists. His ability to craft a timeless, emotionally resonant story in under 3 minutes was unparalleled, but it was his ventures into television that truly set him apart. In a move that shocked the Nashville establishment, Bill became the host of the network game show, The Better Sex, in 1977. For the traditionalists, a respected country artist hosting a light-hearted game show was tantamount to heresy. It was seen as a sellout, a move that cheapened his artistic credibility. But this criticism missed the point of who Bill Anderson was. He was not just an artist. He was a brilliant businessman with a journalist's understanding of mass media. The game show was a strategic move to keep his face in front of a national audience, expanding his brand beyond the confines of country radio. It was a pioneering step that paved the way for future country stars like Blake Shelton and Reba McEntire to become multimedia personalities. His personal life during this period was marked by the quiet struggles that often accompany immense success. His first marriage ended in divorce, a casualty of the relentless pressures of touring and a life lived in the spotlight. He endured a serious car accident that served as a stark reminder of his own mortality. And beneath the surface of his amiable, easygoing public persona lay a quiet, private struggle, as he occasionally wrestled with periods of melancholy and mild depression, a shadow many trace back to the early loss of his mother. Unlike Jan's overt, catastrophic tragedies, Bill's pain was a quieter, more introspective loneliness, a melancholy that found its voice not in public confession, but in the heartbreaking lyrics of his greatest ballads. He was the quintessential example of the sad clown, a man who brought joy to millions while privately wrestling with his own ghosts. Looking back, the story of Jan Howard and Bill Anderson is also a fascinating window into the cultural dynamics of their time. Their partnership, for all its success, was not immune to the subtle biases of the era. A recurring historical debate is whether the duo format ultimately limited Jan's solo career. She was a powerhouse vocalist and a gifted songwriter in her own right, yet she was often relegated to the role of Bill's girl singer. This was no fault of Bill's, but rather a reflection of a male-dominated industry where female artists were frequently defined by their association with male stars. While the partnership gave her the biggest hits of her career, one can't help but wonder if, in a different era, Jan Howard would have achieved the same level of solo superstardom as her contemporaries, Loretta Lynn and Tammy Wynette. The other great what-if of their story revolves around the secrets they kept. Harlan Howard's bigamy was a potentially career-ending scandal that was deliberately kept under wraps. In the conservative world of 1950s and 60s Nashville, such a revelation could have branded Jan as a homewrecker or a woman of loose morals, regardless of the fact that she was the victim. The Nashville Code of Silence, an unwritten rule to protect its own, likely saved her career. It's a stark reminder of the fragile and often unfair standards to which female artists were held. Similarly, Bill Anderson's foray into game shows represents a core tension that still exists in country music today: the battle between authenticity and commercialism. The criticism he faced speaks to a deep-seated desire within the genre's fan base for their artists to remain pure, untainted by the perceived phoniness of Hollywood. Bill's career proved that an artist could be both: a respected Hall of Fame songwriter and a savvy, commercially successful television personality. He was a trailblazer, expanding the boundaries of what a country artist could be, even if it meant ruffling a few traditionalist feathers along the way. In the long twilight of their lives, the professional partnership of Jan Howard and Bill Anderson was reborn as a cherished memory, a touchstone for fans of classic country music. They would occasionally reunite for special performances on shows like Larry's Country Diner or at the Grand Ole Opry, their old chemistry instantly reigniting, their voices still blending with a familiar, comfortable magic. These appearances were a joy for fans, a warm reminder of a bygone era, but they were also a testament to the genuine, lifelong affection between them. On March 28, 2020, Jan Howard passed away peacefully at the age of 91. The tributes that poured in from across the music world spoke of a life of incredible strength and a voice that could never be silenced. She was remembered not just for her hits, but for her indomitable spirit. Bill Anderson, her friend of over 50 years, gave a heartfelt tribute, remembering her as a survivor and one of the most courageous people he had ever known. Today, as of late 2025, Bill Anderson remains a vital and beloved figure in country music. He is a living legend, the undisputed dean of the Grand Ole Opry, still writing songs, still performing, and still carrying the torch for the classic Nashville sound he helped to create. His longevity is a staggering achievement, a career built on a foundation of talent, hard work, and an unwavering respect for the craft of the song. So what is the final legacy of the survivor and the songwriter? Individually, they are giants. Jan Howard's story is an American epic, a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure the unendurable. She was a pioneering voice for women in country music, a woman who sang her truth no matter how painful, and in doing so, gave a voice to millions. Bill Anderson's legacy is written in the grooves of hundreds of records, a body of work that is woven into the very DNA of country music. He is a master craftsman, a poet of the common man, whose songs will be sung as long as people fall in and out of love. But their shared legacy is where the deepest truth lies. Their story redefines what a partnership can be. It was never a romance, but it was a profound love story nonetheless, a story of friendship, loyalty, and mutual respect. In an industry known for its rivalries and betrayals, they offered each other a safe harbor. The greatest secret they shared was not a scandal, but a quiet, unwavering commitment to being there for each other, through dizzying success and devastating loss. Their story is a powerful and timeless reminder that strength is not just about standing tall on your own. Sometimes it's about having someone to lean on, the fire and the whisper, the survivor and the songwriter. Together, they made more than just music. They made a testament to the enduring grace of the human heart.